So thank you so much for joining me today in this webinar on how to motivate employees with virtual options and tokens. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Kaisa Luht, and I'm the Global Reward Lead at Saltex, where we simplify stock options with tokens. But before Saltex, I worked in Wise, which is a fintech startup, and there for years I managed their global employee stock option plans globally, and I got the experience of creating equity strategy and doing a lot of reward communication. If you have any questions during this webinar, then I would ask you to post the questions into the Q&A box. We have at the moment disabled the chat function so that all the questions would be in one place and I wouldn't miss any of them by chance. Now, I don't know about you, but these last few years have been really rough, in my opinion, for both employers and employees. Every day, okay, maybe not every day, but very often, I see posts about people being laid off from their companies, be due to the COVID that we just had, or the war that's impacted the economy, or the recession in general. Everyone's suffering. And at the same time, 89% of companies in 2022 reported that they have difficulties with retaining their key employees. So on the one hand, companies are having to lay off their people, and at the same time, they are struggling with retention. And what the organizations are doing is looking beyond pay. So you can't keep raising salaries forever to motivate your employees. And for this, employers combine salaries with other benefits. For example, employee ownership. But the employee ownership isn't enough. Because, for example, in Germany, 83% of employees said that they are unhappy with the information that has been given to them on their ownership plans. And if they are unsure how the benefit works, then it won't motivate them to work harder or stay longer in the company. So we still have a problem. Now, something for you to think about. If I asked you today to do a little survey for your employees on how many of them actually understand your option plan, would you be a bit scared to find out what the result is? If your answer is yes to this question, then that's actually not a bad thing, because you've already found your way here, and hopefully you will get a few tips or at least some ideas on how to improve things. But before we go on with how I think the situation could be improved and some of the solutions I offer, I'd like to talk a bit about the different employee ownership types so that we are on the same page when I refer to them. I like to categorize them into 3 groups based on what the employee receives when the benefit vests. So in the first group, we have real shares and restricted stock units. And when they vest, the employee gets actual shares. Then in the second group, we have employee share options. And when they vest, the employee receives an option to buy a share. So before the employee becomes a shareholder, there is an action that they have to take to buy them out. This is also called exercising. And in the last group, we have virtual stock options and also tokens. Now, these are slightly different because they vest a promise for a cash payout on exit. In this scenario, when I say exit, I mean the sale of the company. And they are a bit easier on the admin side because the employees don't have to become shareholders to get the profit from the benefit. But how do you choose between these very different categories of employee ownership? So in my experience, the number one thing to look for is whether the country that you plan to give out this, whether there are any tax advantages or any tax advantage schemes that the government has created. Why I say this is because you can influence how much tax the employee has to pay by choosing the right plan or following certain rules. For example, if we take the UK or Estonia, if you follow certain rules and also the employee doesn't exercise and sell their shares before 3 years from bidding them, then they have to pay 20% of tax instead of over 60%. That is 3 times less tax that they have to pay because they have followed certain rules. And I think this is a huge saving for the employee, but also a selling point for the employer that they know how to actually use the plan and they talk about this to their employees. Now, the second point that I think is very important is knowing when and how much tax employees actually have to pay, because there are possibly 4 points where an employee might have to pay tax depending on what they receive and what country they're receiving it in. So we have the grant, we have when the benefit starts vesting, then with stock options, there is the point of exercise, and finally when they sell it. And knowing when your employees get taxed is important because they could end up having to pay tax on their benefit before they get any cash out of it. If we take the UK and their VSOP plan, then having to exercise their options before 3 years will result in an immediate tax bill for them. So it pays to know this and also to tell your employees about it, but just make sure you give disclaimers that you're not a tax advisor and that this is just general information for them. Then the last 2 points I have is whether you want to use the plan you're setting up for remote teams and whether you want to use it also for non-employees. When I say non-employees, I mean advisors, but also contractors. So with remote teams, if you have your headquarters in one country, let's say Germany, but you also want to hire someone in Belgium and want to give the plan to them, you should know that before you can give out options or tokens to them, you need a bit of background information. So with options, you have to make sure that the plan is legally compatible with their jurisdiction, and you need to know that there could be different taxes that they have to pay. With tokens, it's a bit easier because tokens have been created in a way that it's scalable internationally. That's why we are doing them. And also with giving virtual options or options to non-employees, again, these plans have been created with employees in mind. So already in the legal text, very often you see that they are supposed to be given out to employees. Once you want to give them out to non-employees, you have to get lawyers involved. You have to most likely change your plan, the wording, and know the country where you're giving them out, whether it's at all possible. Again, a bit easier is if you use tokens because tokens are meant to be used also for non-employees. I was also thinking on giving you a bit more information about the different plan types one by one, so you know what they're all about. Restricted stock units, also they are called RSUs. They, as I mentioned, vest shares and taxes paid usually upon vesting, because once the benefit vests, the employee already receives something of value and they immediately have to pay tax on it. And this is also the reason why it is best for late stage startups or public companies, because the employee will be able to sell their share and then pay the tax with it. Whereas if an early stage startup was using an RSU, they would end up with a tax bill and having to pay it from their own salary. So it's not very useful for earlier startups. Stock options are they best options, which means that you have to buy them out first, and tax is paid upon exercise or sale depending on the country. And these are beneficial and popular in countries where there are tax advantage schemes, usually used with early to mid-stage startups. Then we have virtual options. They vest a promise for cash, and tax is paid on cash flow. So usually an employee doesn't have to pay tax before they get the cash. And they are alternatives to stock options when taxes are too problematic. Again, they are used mainly in Germany, but I have also used them in China. They come in when a company wants to use stock options and they find that there are problems with it, and then turn to virtual options. And finally, tokens. They also promise cash and taxes paid on cash flow. Best for companies planning to expand internationally, and it also works well for other contributors such as advisors and contractors. Now, a bit also about why employee ownerships are beneficial. Research shows that they improve the performance of the company. Usually the research I've read doesn't give any specific percentages, but they just draw a very strong positive correlation between a company having an employee ownership plan versus a company not having it. It's also been shown that they reduce employee turnover. If we take companies with the plan, the average turnover is 5.2 years, whereas in companies where you don't have the plan, it's 3.4 years. You might think that these are very long time periods, especially if you come from the startup world, but this research also included larger corporations, and that's why the amount of years is a bit higher. Employee benefits are also known to create more company pride and loyalty. I think I can vouch for that as well, as having come from a startup that has already successfully become public. And they allow for greater flexibility for compensation. Now, what do I mean by that is if a company is negotiating wages with an employee or potential employee, then the company can give several options. Like, do they want a higher wage and a lower number of tokens, or would they like a higher number of tokens and a lower wage? In this case, it takes into consideration the employee's risk appetite and also where they might be in their life, how much cash they currently need. So some people are already thinking about their long-term future and heavily investing. Those sort of employees might be more interested in getting a larger percentage of their compensation in employee ownership. And therefore, it's also beneficial for the company because they don't have to pay so much of their cash out right away. Instead, they can give this employee almost like part of the company and make them feel more part of the success as well. Now I wanted to do something fun with you as well, so I'm not only talking all the time. And for this, I would like to ask for the poll to be opened. Now, my first question to you is, which equity program do you have in your company? I am very curious to know what sort of companies are represented here and what you're currently using. I hope that everyone has had the chance to answer. Richie, can you make the poll results public? From this, I can see that actually we have a lot of companies with virtual stock options, 50%. and 36% have employee options, and 23% have none. Oh, that's very interesting. So this means you have a possibility to create something completely new in your company, and 9% have already RSUs and stocks. Richie, if we could have the next question, please. Now, I'd also like to ask you, on a scale of 1 to 5, how effective do you find your stock incentive program? At the moment, the results are showing an average result of somewhere in the 40 to 60 percentile. You say that your effectiveness level is. Some of you even say it is very effective. I applaud you. Sadly, the same amount who say it's very effective also say that it's not effective at all. So we have everything. And the last question, please. What is your biggest challenge when dealing with employee ownership plans? I'll read the answers out as well. Is it understanding legal and tax? I know that was very challenging for me when I first started out. Is it answering employee queries? Knowing how much to allocate to your employees? Or communicating the incentives? So making sure that everyone understands what their value is. So from these results, I can also see that it's all over the board, but the most difficult part is understanding legal and tax. And right after we have communicating incentives. So this question is helpful for me in knowing what sort of webinars to do next. So thank you so much. I think we can stop sharing this. But let's continue. We have talked about different employee ownership types and what kind of employee ownerships you should choose depending on what's available to you. But in my experience, the number one thing for having a successful employee ownership plan is communicating it well, because you could have the best legal terms and you could have come up with the greatest plan for your employees, but if the employees don't understand it, then there's no benefit for them. Or rather, they will get the benefit in the end, but there's no benefit for the company because it won't motivate them as it should. So what to do about it? I'm going to suggest 4 action steps, which I have used all myself. And I've also put them in an order of what I think is most important to least important. So number 1 to me would be to find a platform, find a home for your tokens or virtual options or stock options. Some of you probably still have your options in an Excel, and that is okay because we all start from there. But having a platform doesn't just take away some of the administrative burden. It also helps visualize the journey. This is especially important for tokens and virtual options because unlike with real options where the employee will end up with shares, with tokens and virtual options don't have that kind of a connection up until they get the cash. So they need to see the journey and feel it. And with platforms, it helps. They can log into it, they can see the vesting schedule, how much they already have. Nicer platforms also send reminders to the employees saying you vested this or that amount. And I always found that little celebratory email to be helpful, and it reminded me of the benefit. So yeah, it creates nice engagement with the employees. Number 2 would be to run regular learning sessions. These can take different forms. For example, if your company is big enough that you have regular onboarding sessions, let's say every month or maybe every 2 months, you could introduce a learning course into the onboarding sessions. It could be 20 or 30 minutes long, and you could cover the basics of what your option or token plan is. I did this for quite a few years in Wise, and it was always it always got very positive feedback from the new employees, because most of them had never heard about what the options are, and those who had heard something had the opportunity to ask questions on the specifics of what our company does, and example how exercising works and how they will finally see the profit from it, and so on. Another type of learning session that you could do if you don't have regular onboarding sessions, the questions and answer session. So this could be with your CEO or someone who is really knowledgeable in your people team, and have them do like a very basic presentation, but then also answer questions and answers live with the employees. And again, this kind of learning sessions, they create a live communication channel between you and the employee, and it allows them to ask questions about this benefit that they might not otherwise do. Because I don't know about you, but I wasn't very keen on sending random questions about benefits to my HR department. So this kind of gives a friendly forum and open forum for employees to ask the questions that they want to ask. Thirdly, I would create an internal wiki, a resource that would be complementary to the sessions that you will hopefully be running. This wiki can start out small, and then over time it will probably grow into a bit of a beast. So I would recommend linking the different topics you have from early on. The basics of what you could add there is what is a token or what is an option, how does exercising, how does selling work, how are the levels set in your company, because this varies from company to company, how will the profit be calculated that the employee gets in the end. It's probably something you haven't maybe thought through either yet, so it's a good time to start. And also it's always really, really good to remind the employees who has to pay the taxes. Because sometimes employees think that this is a benefit, they don't have to do anything, but almost always there are taxes that the employees have to pay as well. Just a sec. Number 4, and this would be my last tip of the day, is to also check the pulse with surveys. So before you start communicating, why not do a very short survey on how well your employees already understand the benefit. So the example questions you could include are, do they have enough resources to understand the benefit? What is the importance level of the benefit to them? Do they even care about it? And whether there is a desire to learn more. In this case, you will understand more of where the gaps are. And if you do it every year, you will see a nice trend of where things are improving. If you do plan to do this compensation survey every year, I would recommend that you use the same questions, because if you change the questions, you won't see trends. So I know it's very tempting to update and improve the questions every year. Now, before I get to the questions and answers part, which for which we have reserved quite a bit of time, let's quickly go over what I just talked about. So employee ownership forms a flexible part of compensation plan. It's a very useful type of benefit to have, and it should draw in good talent, and employees are getting more knowledgeable about this benefit year to year. So if you have it, it's great. If you don't have it, you might want to think about getting one. These sort of employee compensation plans, they create more motivated employees. They have been shown to help with retention. And if you forget everything else that I have told you today, then please remember that your employee ownership plan, the success of it depends on your communication ability. So have a think what you would like to do with your employees. Think about the groups that you would like to include, and yeah, start creating materials for them and presenting. Yeah, let's see if there are any questions. No. We have a question from Pavel. I think the question was about the poll that we did before, but I just didn't notice it. So I will disregard it. But Estelle has asked whether I did the learning session in person for onboarding or if I recorded a video, and whether I think both would work. So we always did the learning session in person because our onboarding sessions were usually for a few days, and they consisted of several different kind of sessions, and just one of them was this session on options. And why I did it in person is because it allowed people to be more engaged and ask questions live of me. But I think if you pre-recorded a certain part, that would work as well, as long as you have someone to answer the questions later on live. Right, I am waiting for more questions, if you have any. How much knowledge do employees generally have on this topic? I would say very, very little. When I first started with education in WISE, then I didn't know anything about it either. But once I started doing the sessions and learning more and more on this myself, I got to the understanding that employees don't understand it because it's such a new benefit on the market. And as soon as we had the first secondary sale, the interest peaked, and people started to be more engaged with this benefit. How many people in WISE did not buy out their options? That is a good question. I would say that almost everyone has bought them out, and those who haven't bought them out haven't done so yet because of tax reasons. So for example, I am still keeping some of my stock options after leaving WISE because I'm waiting for the 3 years in Estonia to be done. So I don't have to pay over 60% of tax, and I can pay only 20%. How transparent company should be in communicating value of shares. In WISE, we were very transparent. We even showed what the share price was every single funding round. We just gave a lot of disclaimers on that this value might not represent what the share could be worth once it goes public. So how transparent the company should be, I think, depends strictly on the company values and how transparent the company is in general with its employees. So if you have a policy of being transparent, I don't see a problem with being transparent also about the share value. In fact, I think it will create a stronger and trusting bond between you and the employees, but just give disclaimers that the price can go up and down, just like with any shares. Estelle has another question. Would you recommend having a tax advisor that is close to the company and understands the program that employees can go to for questions about tax? And how does this scale across countries? Yes, I would absolutely advise having a tax advisor that you are close with the company. We even hired our own tax advisor in-house in the end, because we were doing so many secondary sales almost every year. And it really, really helped us communicate all the tax issues to our employees, because we were in so many countries, and the tax advisor was very good in explaining how they should deal with their tax without actually giving tax advice per se. Because even if you have a tax advisor as a company, you still say that tax is everyone's own very personal business, and this information is just for using, and if they have any concerns on how to pay tax, they should get their own advisor. But the second part of the question on how scalable it is, I think in the beginning, you might want to have a certain tax advisor that's not in-house, because it's not feasible for smaller companies to have their own tax advisors. But if you become bigger and you see that you're going to do secondary sales, then already before the first secondary sale, I warmly recommend to have a tax advisor in-house, because it's one thing to have an advisor that's from an outside company who doesn't really care that much, and another thing, having someone who really cares about your employees and gets involved with problems. So yes. What have been my biggest challenges when communicating to employees about ESOP and VSOP benefits? I think in the beginning it was creating interest, because when it's just a paper that they sign and there have been no secondary sales, it's very difficult to get the employees interested in understanding legal concepts. What I did then was I reached out to other team leads. I had a network of people who I talked to in the company from different teams, and I asked them to ask their team members to come to my learning sessions. And so bit by bit, the understanding grew, as well as the interest, because people started talking about it. After the secondary sale, the communicating part became a lot easier, because when the newer employees saw that the older employees got the benefit of cash out of it, everything changed, and suddenly stock options was a really important benefit for everyone. How often do you review the option program, and what influences it? I would say it's good to review it every 4 or 5 years. Of course, every time you go to a new country, if you have stock options, you need to review it anyways, whether you can expand to the country using your existing program, or if you have to change something a little bit, or it's fine to use on its own. So with expanding to countries with stock options, you review it anyways. But in terms of the terms and conditions that you want to give to your employees, it depends a bit on your compensation philosophy. So for example, we had one contract where we had, I don't know if it was by accident, but basically with one contract type, employees had to exercise their options when they left the company. And we quickly realized we didn't want that burden on them. We wanted the best for our employees. And so we changed that program or that plan, and we started issuing new contracts which didn't make the employees exercise their options when they left the company, and instead they could keep the options as options until a secondary sale or an IPO came, and they could actually buy and pay for the tax at the same time. From your experience, have you seen a change in the understanding of employers and employees about the equity incentive plans during the recent years? This is an interesting question. I would say yes, I have seen a change for the better. However, objectively speaking, it might also be because I work in this field and I am in a sort of a bubble of HR professionals, as well as my friends know about this because I talk to them about it, and so the information moves around. It could be if I go to a completely different country and another company, no one knows anything about it. So I would say yes, the general feeling is that the understanding is becoming better. And this could also be because the startups are maturing, and as startups mature and they become public companies, more and more people get the benefit of cash from the equity of the company. So the word spreads. But yeah, I'm hoping I'm objective about this. What are the best practices to evaluate the general knowledge of employees on this topic? Well, as I mentioned before, I would say that surveys are generally the best way to evaluate the employees' knowledge on any topic. From my experience, have I seen a change in the understanding of that question? I already answered. Can you talk a bit about how secondaries are typically used to incentivize employees? Who is it offered to, and when and how? So this is a very large topic. How secondaries are used to incentivize employees. Well, if you include your employees in the secondary, meaning that you have a funding round and there are investors who are buying more shares, and some of the shares are bought from the employees, then employees get extra cash without the company going public right away. Who is it offered to and when? This is very company dependent. Even in Wise, we changed who we offered it to as time went by. So at first we looked at tax rules and wanted to give the best to the employees. So we allowed only those who had vested for 3 years already and got the tax benefit. Later on, everyone who had anything vested could participate. So I think who is it offered to changes with the company, not policy, but its willingness to organize this as well, because the more inclusive the group of employees is that you offer it to, the more employees you will have participating. And when we started from a few hundred people in the secondary, the last secondary I did had thousands of employees in it. So I think it depends. Probably companies first start small and then they go bigger and bigger and bigger. Did you have multiple incentive programs at Wise? We did, yes. We had stock options, we had phantom options, and in the end we turned to RSU. So we had quite a lot of different ones. What would be the topic for the next event? If you mean for the webinar, then we haven't decided that quite yet, but we do have a live event coming up in Berlin. And if you have a look at our LinkedIn page, then you will see all the details there for it. And the last question at the moment that I see, from my experience, in which countries in Europe is the legal environment most VSOP friendly? I think VSOPs can generally be used in most of the countries, but I am not that familiar with them because we prefer to use stock options in Wise, whereas which is most ESOP friendly. I think I am quite partial to Estonia because I know the system here very well, but also it does have a very good tax advantage scheme for employees. So I would say Estonia. Why do you prefer to use real stock options at Wise over VSOP? That was actually decided way before I joined Wise, but looking back of what the reasons might have been, I think the company founders just really wanted to share the actual ownership of the company with their employees. We always talked about how everyone is part of the company and everyone was made, everyone felt like we were growing a company together, and giving actual shares, I think that was just their preferred method of showing this. Right, so I don't see any open questions at the moment anymore. I hope this was useful for you today, and I hope to see you again in future seminars and webinars. So thank you, and have a nice day.